YOLO Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be going over the answers in the book. So we have just these questions here, and you can again see them in the answer document. As you can see, we have our answers right here in a Facebook tab. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's look at these. So what are the two ways fundamentals are removed? So we talked about there being static removals where it's part of the sound, and also filter removals, or we could get a little more complicated and even layer in a sound that has the fundamental removed statically and then put in a sound that has the fundamental included already, and then by removing the layer we would have a sound that had a static removal, but it was done via layers. So there's two basic ways though. There's one where we just straight up remove the fundamental out of the original timbre, really popular for additive synths or samplers that can perform Fourier transforms on sounds and remove them. And we also just have layer removal. So you just had to say statically, where part of the timbre, or in a layered fashion, such as done with a filter. So, okay, does removing the fundamental change our perception of pitch? No, we've talked about this for a couple videos, and I have a whole bunch of video links up here. So you should know the answer to this one. By the way, you should have tried this before you're watching this answer video, just so you know, answer video thing. True, false, adding sub bass does not affect our chords. That is false. We have a video clearly demonstrating chords being changed by adding a sub bass. What are two common uses for sub bass? Well, we listed a bunch, and then the answers I list a couple, but one is a separate sub used to clean up the low end, and then another really easy one is to add a sub bass to a kick drum in order to shape the kick in a way we want. There are a couple others that you could consider. We could get a bit fancier with how we talk about layers, and we could add a sub bass to calm the upper end of the harmonic spectrum if it was a sine wave. We've seen lots of examples where by layering in a sine wave, it masks some of the brighter end of the spectrum, some of the upper harmonics. And so that's another very good use for a sub bass. And there's a couple other layering examples we talked about, especially when it's not really in the sub bass range. So I listed some additional ones in the answer key. What are two common uses for sub bass? I just answered this. List 3 mixing dangers, with at least one being a generally forbidden technique. So right away when someone says, like, what should you never do to a sub bass? I generally think of adding reverb. Typically you don't do that, but you can totally do it. People have done it successfully, but it's usually not a good idea to do. And then you could just list up here, I have the ones we talked about. One of the ones that really gets me is the EQ one. So we want to generally use a fader to adjust the level of our sub bass, because it's just a single frequency, so you can't really EQ it unless you're fixing room issues, literally acoustic problems. But it's a sub bass generally generated outside. You don't record a sub bass, usually you just make a sub bass, so usually you have no excuses. And then I also listed in my answers, I listed this top one, another one I think should be emphasized. A lot of sounds already have low end. You don't always need an extra like sub bass, so don't feel like you have to add it to everything. And so, but if you could have listed any of those and you would have been fine. True, false. Linear phase fixes all phase problems a plugin may cause. This is false. And I can't remember if I linked a tutorial, but if you open up like if you open up Maximus, one's a compressor, one's a synth, and you turn on linear phase, run a saw wave through Maximus, and then turn on linear phase, you'll still find your saw wave. Run a saw wave through it, you'll still find your saw wave is all messed up. And but if you open up like the Fruity multiband compressor and turn on, I believe it was the finite impulse response filter, you'll find out that it's fine. So there's a filter design also comes into play. Linear phase doesn't mean what people typically think it means. And it's kind of interesting. I had some professors who actually were wrong about what linear phase even meant. So just because someone who's really good at mixing doesn't necessarily mean they have all their things like correct. You know, they could have mistakes every now and then. I probably have a mistake every now and then. Or definitely at some point I'm going to say something that was just a mistake. So you always want to double check. And yeah, linear phase is just not this magic thing. If you don't believe me, go ahead, open up Maximus, give it a go. And then what is the start of a sample called? It's called a chiff. We talked about this a lot too, especially in the reinforcing a kick drum. We talked about how we want to avoid and preserve our chiffs and affect the periodic portions of waveforms. If you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. These should all be really easy questions to answer. None of these should be incredibly difficult or anything. Now, you may have had to go back and look for them, but they otherwise, just checking to make sure you've got like the fundamentals of this section down. As you can see, we're going to be moving into applications of the sine wave in the coming lesson. So we've been really focused on sub bass, and that's fine, but we went into this route as sort of a subsection of the sine wave because I'm trying to go through this as organically as possible. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.